I declare bankruptcy!
No matter how good, some restaurants just weren't meant to survive. With that said, here are 15 chain restaurants that vanished across America. Chi-Chi's.
We only really serve Mexican food.
You'd be hard-pressed to find someone out there that doesn't enjoy the occasional stop at a good Mexican restaurant. After all, Mexican cuisine is one of the most beloved styles of cooking in America.
Bon appetit! Oh, Mexican food!
So it may have come as a bit of a shock when the well-established Mexican food chain Chi-Chi's began to vanish across the nation. Debuting in Minneapolis in the mid-1970s, their slogan was the celebration of food, and Chi-Chi's soon expanded to over 200 locations across the country. Unfortunately, a series of poor management decisions, stiff competition, and an outbreak of hepatitis A led to the once prosperous Mexican food chain going the way of the dinosaur. With popular items such as fried ice cream adorning the menu, Chi-Chi's was not only a fun Mexican experience, but also a delicious one. Fortunately, hope is not entirely lost for those who love Chi-Chi's, as a select few locations can still be found across the pond in Europe. Red Barn.
There's a barn?
What is your fascination with barns?
Red Barn was one of those chains that stood out from the rest, with its restaurants resembling, well, you guessed it, Red Barns.
Obviously.
The chain debuted in the early 60s and came complete with a self-serve salad bar and signature burgers. Their Big Barney and the Barn Buster resembled the most recognizable burgers in the country, the Big Mac and the Whopper, respectively. At its peak, Red Barn had hundreds of locations nationwide, and even a few international locations in both Australia and Canada. However, due to multiple changes in ownership and changes in customer eating habits, Red Barn was all but finished by the end of the 80s. While the franchise did attempt to revamp its menu and update its image, it was too little, too late for Red Barn. Howard Johnson's.
So I must make my hotel of dreams, like every other Howard Johnson?
It may be hard to imagine now, but at one time, Howard Johnson's was one of the largest franchises in the country. Started as a small newsstand and soda fountain shop in the 1920s, the future chain would undergo a complete overhaul when Howard Deering Johnson took over the business after his father passed away. Johnson renamed the future chain, turning the small outlet into a giant franchise with a secret weapon, a revamped ice cream recipe.
Ice cream sandwiches!
Business exploded soon after, with a large expansion across the country as eager customers lined up to sample the 28 radically different flavors of ice cream and enjoy a casual dine-in experience. Unfortunately, the franchise fell victim to the streamlining and evolution of the fast food business model, with chains like McDonald's leading the way. This forced Howard Johnson's to lose momentum and eventually disappear. Steak and Ale.
You know what they say about tenderloin, always a risky option. It's got to be done just right.
There's a large portion of the country that enjoys a nice, juicy steak. However, your average steakhouse can be a bit on the pricey side.
Sorry, you guys, but I can't pay that. It's too much money.
Fortunately, a man by the name of Norman Brinker, the same man responsible for other successful franchises such as Chili's and Jack in the Box, founded Steak and Ale in the mid-60s. This place for steak served up steakhouse quality for an affordable price. Steak and Ale was also responsible for many restaurant innovations, such as the introduction of free refills, dinner items at a lower cost during lunch, and an all-you-can-eat salad bar. With the many innovations and reasonably priced steak, it's no wonder that Steak and Ale locations started to pop up all over America. Unfortunately, there's a reason those fancy steakhouses charge as much as they do for their quality cuts of beef. This, combined with the growing competition, meant that Steak and Ale wasn't able to continue with the low-cost steak business model, closing entirely in the late 2000s. First time here? Well, we're not going to vanish, so take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much. Beefsteak Charlie's.
So then I went over to Beefsteak Charlie's.
Beefsteak Charlie's?
Yes!
2 words: unlimited everything. Add to that a specialty steak sandwich with a lineage going back to the first decade of the 20th century, and you have the racing-themed, New York-born Beefsteak Charlie's.
Nice.
The chain grew to include over 60 locations across the East Coast of the United States and proved that there isn't a person out there that doesn't find the prospect of unlimited salad, beer, wine, and sangria very appealing. Unfortunately, the practice of offering unlimited supplies of food can get rather costly, which the chain found out the hard way. While Beefsteak Charlie's lasted a respectable 60-plus years, satisfying customers with their never-ending food supply, the chain ended up filing for bankruptcy in the late 1980s. The last remaining location finally closed in the late 2000s, with the endless everything finally coming to an end. VIPs.
Just waiting for my breakfast.
Louis!
It can be tough pulling an all-nighter on the road, especially if you find yourself wanting something to eat that isn't a fast food burger. That's where VIPs came to the rescue.
Not fast food, good food quickly.
VIPs was one of the first 24-hour restaurant chains in America. With strategically placed locations along major interstates, VIPs offered popular truck stop food all along the U.S. Northeast and would eventually make its way as far west as Nevada and California. The chain was also beneficial to road-tripping tourists, offering free maps and encouraging their staff to inform visitors of the best places to visit. Unfortunately, the chain was far too similar to rival restaurant chain Denny's, and ultimately VIPs vanished across the country. Somewhat ironically, Denny's bought up most of the VIP restaurant locations. Lums.
What's up with all the ketchup?
Thank you for asking, Rosa. It's for my hot dog.
When your establishment is known for such cooking practices as beer-steamed hot dogs, it's a safe bet that you're going to create a buzz. And that's exactly what Lums was able to do. The restaurant chain first opened in Miami and offered the aforementioned beer-steamed hot dogs, along with other tasty classics such as sherry-infused sauerkraut, which topped the drunken hot dog, and the 32-spice blend Ollie Burger. From 1956 to 1969, Lums was doing so well that the founding brother duo, Clifford and Stuart Perlman, decided to buy Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas for $60 million before ultimately selling the chain. Unfortunately, a fun and unique menu wasn't enough to save the doomed franchise.
My hot dog!
Once again, we can thank the changing owners for Lums finally filing for bankruptcy and disappearing into the sunset. Henry's Hamburgers.
Hamburgers, the cornerstone of any nutritious breakfast.
Sure, hamburgers are plentiful across the country now, but in the mid-50s, it was pretty much just about a few promising upstarts: Burger King, McDonald's, and Henry's. Henry's actually opened its doors a year before McDonald's and was well on its way to opening more locations, with 35 restaurants popping up in the Chicago area alone.
Chicago! The Big Apple!
By the time the 60s rolled around, there were more Henry's locations than both McDonald's and Burger King across the country. Sadly, nothing lasts forever, and in Henry's case, the hamburger chain eventually succumbed to the giant burger franchises and began to vanish nationwide by the 1970s. However, not all the Henry's locations have gone the way of the dodo. There is one Henry's still serving up hamburgers, shakes, and fries, but you'll have to take a trip to Michigan to eat there. Burger Chef.
Sounds good, boss.
Please call me Chef.
That's funny. Chef.
Thank you.
Burger Chef was one of the fast-rising burger chains to first open its doors back in the mid-1950s. At its peak, the chain had over 1,200 locations, with McDonald's being the only other franchise that boasted a larger number of outlets. Burger Chef was also responsible for many fast food innovations, such as the Flame Broiler, which gave the chain the ability to serve up close to 1,000 burgers per hour. The franchise was also the first to offer a burger, fries, and drink combo, which it called the Triple Threat, long before the other chains.
Game changer.
And a fun meal for kids. Sound familiar? Unfortunately, the growing competition was too much for the once mighty burger chain, and the company was sold to Hardee's at the beginning of the 80s for $44 million big ones. Little Tavern.
The commissary will continue to serve horrifying, artery-clogging hamburgers.
Most of us find burgers to be enjoyable, relatively cheap, and maybe even a tad fun. This is made all the more true when you sink your teeth into the tiny palm-sized burger that is the slider. You won't find many franchises that specialize in sliders nowadays, and the same could be said about days gone by. However, there were two chains proudly serving up mini burgers in the U.S., White Castle and Little Tavern. What was Little Tavern? In many ways, Little Tavern was the East Coast's answer to White Castle. Both chains had a similar castle-building construction, and both burger franchises offered sliders of the squared variety.
I see what you did there.
But while White Castle continues to thrive, Little Tavern wasn't able to carve out enough of a niche to survive. Despite once having over 40 locations to its name, Little Tavern was forced to close all locations in the late 2000s. Brown Derby.
Welcome to Hollywood.
One of the most iconic restaurants, due in no small part to its instantly recognizable building shape, was definitely the Brown Derby. Debuting in Los Angeles back in 1926, the Brown Derby served up delicious food to the biggest Hollywood stars of the early 20th century, while becoming an LA landmark. The hat-shaped restaurant spawned 3 additional locations and was responsible for some classics such as the Cobb Salad and the Shirley Temple, all while displaying a myriad of celebrity caricatures on the walls. However, as time changed, the allure of the Brown Derby began to fade, and combined with increasing LA rents as well as other financial setbacks, the restaurant ended up fading away.
You're a month late again. Again.
Luckily, anyone out there wishing for the Brown Derby experience, there exists a Brown Derby tribute at Disney's Hollywood Studios in Orlando. So the Brown Derby spirit lives on, all thanks to the House of Mouse. Pizza Haven.
Look at this thing. It's all hot and glowy. I'll never have cold pizza again.
Pizza is one of the most popular foods in America, and there's definitely no shortage of pizza options to be found. The modern-day pizza pie is also enjoyed overseas, with many countries offering their own national chains. One of those chains was the Australian and New Zealand franchise Pizza Haven.
Australia, mate!
The pizza chain from Down Under first opened its doors in the early 80s and thrived for 20 years, serving up hot slices to hungry Aussies and Kiwis alike. Unfortunately, the chain was eventually sold to the 2 biggest pizza chains on the planet, with Domino's purchasing the New Zealand locations in 2006 and Pizza Hut buying the Australian locations in 2008. The 4 Christo brothers responsible for the creation of Pizza Haven worked hard to build up their franchise, and hopefully the 2 largest pizza chains paid a hefty sum for the efforts. Wetson's.
Matter of fact, it's the best burger I've had in years.
Wetson's first appeared on the burger scene amid the rising chains such as McDonald's, Burger King's, and a few others in the early 60s. By that time, the fast food burger market was thick with competition, but Wetson's was able to hold its own, offering a 15-cent signature burger called the Big W and 10-cent fries to hungry customers for 16 years. The chain experienced a large expansion during those years, with 70 locations opening up across New York. However, Wetson's would eventually be taken down by the other larger chains, forcing the restaurant to completely disappear in 1975.
How sad is that?
While the company did attempt a merger with Nathan's Foods, it wasn't enough to stop the competition from dominating the market. White Tower.
Fake, 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 fake.
There's a difference between being similar and a flat-out ripoff. Unfortunately, White Tower falls under the category of ripoff.
Shame on you.
The Milwaukee chain debuted just a few years after White Castle and shares the same castle design and even similar name choices as the aforementioned mini burger chain. However, this was something White Castle also noticed, and they didn't take the similarities lightly. White Castle sued White Tower in the 30s, which forced the franchise to change its image. Surprisingly, this didn't stop White Tower from thriving, as the franchise ended up with close to 300 locations at its peak. Unfortunately, the chain finally came to an end in 2008. Kenny Rogers Roasters.
Check it out. Wow, Kenny Rogers Roasters finally open.
What's the first thing you think of when you hear the name Kenny Rogers? The beard, the voice, classic country songs like The Gambler? Likely all of the above. But how about a nice rotisserie chicken? Likely not. However, the country singer-songwriter was involved in more than just the singing business in the early 90s. Rogers, along with a former KFC CEO, created Kenny Rogers Roasters, a rotisserie chicken restaurant that served up wood-roasted golden birds.
Cuckoo-ca-cha! Cuckoo-ca-cha!
Unfortunately, the chain suffered a minor setback when rival chicken chain Cluckers sued Rogers for using the wood-roasting cooking method. Rogers responded by purchasing a majority stake in Cluckers. Sadly, the bad fortune didn't end there. Due to stiff competition from the established chicken chains like KFC and Popeyes, Kenny Rogers Roasters ended up filing for bankruptcy in the late 90s. The chain was bought and sold a few times before finally disappearing nationwide. However, all is not lost. fast, as there are a few locations that are still thriving internationally.
Gotta stay optimistic, you know?
Stay right here and tap or click another great video. Hit that subscribe button and ring that bell to join our notification squad.